You're listening to
Sound.
Insightful.
Bible teaching.
For a
Meaningful
Christian walk.
You know what counterpart means? Someone that matches. I got two definitions. I just looked this up right now. Second definition is one of two or more copies of a legal document. That's not the definition we want. First one is kind of confusing. A person or thing holding a position or performing a function that corresponds to that of another person or thing in another place. Anyhow. But tonight we're going to see what a counterpart really is. So last week, what did we talk about? Where's Zoe? What are the two words? Image and dominion. So Genesis 1:26, at some point we all may have this verse memorized. It says, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the things of the earth, especially the creeping things." And the top creep is the devil. We'll get into that in chapter 3. So God made man different than everything else. And this is really critical. We'll get into this. Actually, this message, it's got a few different parts, and it's hard to know what should come first, because I need part 4 to explain part 3, but I want to go through part 3 before part 4. So I'm going to try not to be skipping back and forth, but ultimately I probably will. So the matter of image and dominion, image is we're like God inwardly and outwardly. So we look like God, and also inwardly we're like God. That's not sacrilegious, that's not heretical, this is according to the Bible. And we'll get into that more also. In the New Testament, we had this verse last week, I didn't even touch it. It's a very good verse, 2 Corinthians 3:18. It says, "We behold and reflect like a mirror the glory of the Lord." Glory, what's a good definition of glory? I'm looking at David. It's one of those words everybody knows, right? But then you say, what's the definition? It's like, what's the definition of grace? It's like, yeah, Anybody know a good definition of glory?
God expressed.
God expressed. Woohoo! Okay. Subscribe to this man's podcast.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. But we express God. But this happens through a process in the New Testament called transformation. We will get to that probably more later. But it says we're being transformed into the same image, from one degree of glory to another degree of glory. This comes as we behold the Lord day by day, face to face. Eventually, we become more Christ-like. You can put it that way. But tonight, what we want to talk about, there's image and dominion. We're not going to talk much about dominion. We'll get into that in about 2 messages. But tonight, image is really, really important. Because we're talking about the counterpart. We're talking about Adam and Eve. I think you all heard the story Adam and Eve. Yeah. You're probably very familiar with it. But do you know all the details about it? And all the significances? Maybe you do. Maybe you've heard this before. I don't think so. But in Genesis chapter 2, starting with verse 18, this is the story of how Eve came to be. Now, Adam was made, but he was made from, dirt. God made a statue like dirt, and then it looks like God, somewhat. God breathed into it, breath of life, man became a living soul. That's not what he did with Eve. And he also didn't say, let there be woman. He could have done that. But if he had done that, all the significance would be lost. remember last week, or was it, I can't remember when we shared these things, but Adam is a type of Christ. And anything that is a type of Christ, the wife of that person is a type of the church. So, Joseph, you know Joseph? We'll get to him a few weeks hence. He had a wife. You know his wife's name was? Huh? No, not Joseph and Mary, sorry. This is Joseph, Old Testament. This is a popular name. Asenath. She was an Egyptian. She was a type of the church. We'll get to that much later. So we've got Adam and Eve. Adam's a type of Christ. Eve is a type of the church. But in Genesis 2:18, God said it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper as his counterpart. Now God, of course, is God. He knows everything. But on the other hand, you ever come upon someone who's unhappy? Like, maybe Daniel's unhappy. And I'm Daniel's good friend, or maybe Daniel's parent. I'm not Daniel's parent. But, and it's just like, oh. And actually, this is the parent's dilemma. I speak as a parent, right, Peter? It's like, you want your kids to be happy. How do you make your kids happy? You think, oh, here's what they need. And, it's like, you just need this or that. And actually, a lot of times you don't have a clue what they need. You say, well, I'm going to do this. And it's just like, Dad, that's not what I need. That's not what I want. And I'm just like, well, just tell me what you want. And then I'll tell you I can't do it for you, but at least I'll know what you want that I can't do for you. But God knew it's not good for man to be alone. Now again, you can just say, well, he's God, he knows everything. But remember, this is really critical. Man is made in God's image. So we can relate often with people. Sometimes we can't relate with them. But sometimes they're in the same position you are, and you just know what they're going through because you went through the same thing. And you can say with a lot of confidence, I know what they need. God here, even outside of him being God, he could say, it is just not good for man to be alone. Because in the whole universe, who's like God? God had no one to match him, no counterpart. Man, at that time, he was unique. He was the only human being in the universe. There are angels. Angels are cool. But angels are not the same as man. They're all the animals, and all the animals are really interesting. Some aren't that interesting. But, they didn't match man. Will, you got a dog, right?
I do.
Are you happy with your dog?
Yeah.
You love your dog?
Yeah.
What does your dog actually do for you?
She brings
Huh?
me and my wife, especially my wife, happiness.
Brings your wife happiness. Okay, that's kind of something. But I mean, tangibly, I've got a dog too. I was just realizing my dog does nothing for me. I do everything for him.
Yeah, that's true.
I walk him, I feed him. I mean, my wife and I do it. He'll come up, jump in my lap, not to do anything for me, but he wants me to scratch his ears. Everything I do is for him. He doesn't, fetch my slippers. He doesn't chase the rabbits away when I want him to. He doesn't do anything. But I'm still kind of fond of him. But this is not the relationship we have with God. We're not a pet. On the one hand, God does everything for us. But we have to realize God is doing this for himself. So if you said, what do I actually get from that dog? Other than it's just nice to love someone, love an animal. It's like, okay, we'll keep him. tangibly, he doesn't do anything for me. Sometimes he annoys me. But Jehovah God knows it's not good for man to be alone. So what does he do? Well, he brings all the animals and presents them to Adam. Adam says, this one's a giraffe, and that one's a porcupine, and that one's a platypus, or whatever. He names all the animals, but then you realize there's no one that matches me. And God already knew that. But it's like, we'll go through the exercise. Maybe it's just we needed to name all these animals, so we'll take the time to do that. But eventually there's no one that matches God. Or no one matches Adam. There's no one that matches God either. So then what does God do? He does something very, very interesting. It says he caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And in the Bible, sometimes sleep is sleep, but often sleep is death. You might know the story of Lazarus in the New Testament, John chapter 11. And Jesus said, Lazarus is sick, but we're not going to go see him. And then finally he says, okay, Lazarus is sleeping. And his disciples say, oh, that's good, he's sleeping. He'll probably recover now. It's good to get a good sleep when you're sick. Jesus is like, guys, he's dead. So very often in the Bible, when we see sleep, it's death. So Adam, at least in type, this was being put to death. And then he slept. And then God did something just really interesting. He took a rib. The point is he took something out of Adam. Again, he's going to make a wife. What would be the easiest way to make a wife for Adam? Maybe make 100 wives. You can pick the one you like best, right? He didn't do that. He went through this really peculiar process.
Yeah.
Not because God is limited in any way, but the way he does things is very interesting.
Yeah.
So Adam dies, and then he takes a rib out. And just to let you know, men and women do have the same number of ribs. There are some cultures, they probably never counted their ribs, but they say, no, men have one less rib, and it's on the left side because it's close to the heart. I didn't argue too much with them. But even genetically, that doesn't make sense. We can talk about that some other time. Anyway, he took a rib, and then he takes this rib, which is taken from the man, and it says he builds a woman. Very interesting word. He didn't create a woman. He built a woman with something out of man. So then the man wakes up. Now, if he was dead, what would you call that? Resurrection. But anyway, we'll just call it he woke up. And he said, this time, this is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because out of man this one was taken. And then he's got this verse which is quoted a couple times in the New Testament. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. This matter of oneness is very critical in the Bible. But, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. And there's many right answers to this, at least several right answers, but there's only one answer I'm looking for. What was Eve?
The church.
Yeah, she's a type of the church. That's right. But let's say there's no New Testament yet. Let's just,
A wife.
that's a correct answer. That's not what I'm looking for. Woman counterpart, those are all right.
Helper.
Huh? Helper, yeah. That's not what I'm looking for.
Part of that.
Part of that. Actually, you could say Eve was Adam. Because everything that Eve was came from Adam. Now, this is not saying she's inferior. Actually, she's just the same. You say, well, she's female, Adam's male. Genetically, we can take care of that. take the Y chromosome out, duplicate the X chromosome, we'll build a woman. But, there are, you ever seen identical twins? Of course, male and female, you never have identical male and female twins. But if you could, Adam and Eve would have been identical twins. You can't tell them apart. Of course, they were the only two people on the earth at the time. But if there were a crowd of people, and Aaron is there, and I'm Adam, and then you look around and say, I saw someone, she's female, boy, she just looks just like you. She's even the same age. Wow. Are you guys related? And it's like, yeah, she came from my rib. This is not just kind of interesting. This is really critical to realize this. Eve is Adam. Now, of course, she is a distinct person, but everything that she is out of Adam. Yeah. God did not take the rib, add some dirt, and do something and to try to make something really different. No. I don't know if God was concerned with genetics. At that time, there were no mutations. Everything was fine. You could marry your sister and have children because they're identical. Do you know if two sets of identical twins marry each other, like two guys and two girls? You know what their children are? They're cousins, but genetically they're brothers and sisters. Because it's like the same person married the same person. Yeah. So just get this in. Adam and Eve are the same. Clearly they're different, male and female. But in essence, they are the same. Yeah. Because everything that Eve is came out of Adam. Now, actually, we're doing really good. So this is the part where maybe it should have gone before. But this line, the series that we're in, are the seeds that we see in Genesis that are developed through the whole Bible. There are more verses than this. But if you look under this heading, God desires a counterpart for himself. What do you have? Isaiah 54:5. It says, your maker is your husband. And if you're curious who that is, Jehovah of hosts is his name. So what does that verse say? Jehovah's our husband. Is that like too much? I mean, we think of God almighty, all powerful. He is, and sovereign, and everything. And we might think of him as our helper, and when you got a problem, you bring it to him. That's all true. That's all good. I don't think most people think of God as their husband. Do you think of God as your husband? Is that like the first thing you think of? We wake up in the morning, I think I'm going to go see my husband. And, the thing is, in the Bible, male, female, they are distinct. But in God's eyes, we are all female. Because corporately, we'll be the bride. And then he's the male, he's the husband. So, then 2 Corinthians 11:2. These aren't in any real particular order. But Paul is speaking to the believers in Corinth. He says, I'm jealous over you with a jealousy of God. He says, for I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. Paul's view in his ministry is he was betrothing people to Christ as their husband. John 3:29, this is John the Baptist speaking. His disciples came to him and said, hey, John. You know that guy you baptized, Jesus? Everyone's following him. We're losing followers here. This is a problem. We want to build up your ministry. This is another interesting. We'll probably get into this 3 messages from now when we talk about Cain and Abel. But John said, hey, he who has the bride is the bridegroom. I'm just the friend of the bridegroom. So he's getting the bride, I rejoice. I'm the bridegroom's friend. Then Ephesians chapter 5, kind of towards the end, a lot of times I've been to weddings, done weddings, and these verses are used. These are really mysterious verses. It looks like maybe they're pretty straightforward, black and white, but the thought is very deep. I mean, 5:25 it says, "Husbands, love your wives." That's a really good word. You're going to get married, right? Someday. Yeah. So, love your wife. Isn't that good? Can we just stop there? Just love your wives. Husbands, love your wives. It's a good word. Will, love your wife, right? But it goes on. It says, how should we love? As Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. We'll get into this a little bit more very shortly. This is the way he loves the church. It's not just, I love you, I love you. He gave himself up for her. And he goes through this whole thing, sanctifying her, cleansing her, so that she'll be glorious. Verse 28, this is really interesting. I read this verse many times before I saw this. In the same way, the husbands, the same way that Christ loves the church, the husbands ought to love their own wives. How? As their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. That's kind of a strange, way to express that. But if you are so one with your wife, actually loving you is loving me. Because we're not separate, the two shall become one. So even loving my wife, actually, that's just what the word says. You love yourself. Now there is the aspect, maybe you've heard this one. If you haven't heard it, you will live it someday. If you're the husband. Happy wife, happy life. So you keep your wife happy, you will be happy. But we're not talking just about that. Eventually, in verse 32, Paul is talking about, he says, this mystery is great, but what I'm really talking about is Christ and the church. And then you go to the end of the Bible, Revelation. How does the Bible end? It ends with a wedding. And it says, one of the angels said, come here, I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And a little before that it says, the marriage feast has come because the bride has made herself ready. A wedding only happens when the bride is ready. That's always longer than, they say the wedding will start at 2, it will start at 2:20. Because we're waiting for the bride to appear. The husband is there. He just sometimes go talk to them because he's just standing there waiting for the bride. When she comes, that's what everyone else is waiting for too. But she's not going to come till she's ready. And if she's not ready, the husband would say, hey, it's okay. Take a little more time. Get ready. Eventually, at the end of the Bible, the wife will be prepared. And there will be this wedding. There will be a wedding feast. Interestingly, though, it says, after that verse, I'll show you the bride. What does he show him? He shows him the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So the bride is the holy city, which is extremely deep, symbolic, and we will get into that. Maybe about 7 messages from now. Jacob's dream. Okay. Now, we're doing really good. I've got my eyes set on actually finishing on time. So, how did Adam get Eve? Put to sleep, takes a rib out,
Built.
and he gets built. And what is Eve?
Adam.
Adam. You got that. Don't lose that. When Jesus in John chapter 12 At this point, it was kind of the peak of his ministry on the earth in an outward way. People were flocking to him. This is obviously before he got crucified. And his disciples came to him and said, hey, the whole world is going after you. Now, if you were one of Jesus' disciples, you might have thought, finally, this is great. Everyone else is seeing what we're seeing. This guy, I'm following the right guy. I'm not following John the Baptist. Those guys are losers. We're going for Jesus. And Jesus speaks this really kind of strange word. He says, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. It's like, why are you saying this? Well, this really has to do with the counterpart. This really has to do with God's purpose. Now, Jenna, can you tell the difference between wheat and barley?
Actually, I can.
Like just the grain, right?
Probably not just the grain. I guess you have the sheets and stuff.
Yeah.
I'll give you that, then I might know.
Yeah. I say that because they're very close together. Now, if I gave you a grain of wheat and pumpkin seed, can you tell the difference?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that's not hard. Anyone could. At least you might know which one's which, but you can say these are really different. Now, if you wanted to grow wheat and you planted a bunch of wheat and pumpkins came up, what would you conclude?
Be very confused.
Very confused. This is very strange. When you plant wheat, what should you get? Wheat. If I plant anything, a particular seed, that is what I'm going to get. When Jesus said, I'm a grain of wheat, or he's a grain of wheat, he's going to fall into the ground and die. This is like sowing a grain of wheat. What is that grain of wheat going to produce? More wheat. Many grains. This is going to be multiplied. Jesus is God, and Jesus is man. These two together. But through his death and resurrection, just like Adam, something is produced. Now, Jesus, when he was on the cross, I don't know if it was just being mean or what, but one of the soldiers took a spear and pierced his side. He was already dead. And it says, out came blood and water. So something came out of Jesus. The blood is redemption. Water is something of life in the Bible. On the cross, Jesus died to forgive our sins. But in resurrection, what did he do? He produced a church. Now, what is Eve? What is the church? The church, when we believe in the Lord Jesus, we are regenerated. And we're regenerated with the divine nature, with the divine life. The Bible, many places, says that we are born of God. We're born again, born anew, regenerated. I got this verse here, 2 Peter 1:4 says we're partakers of the divine nature. It says we're children of God. I have 4 children. Each one of them is like me. Not totally. I've got a wife too, and she's 50% of the equation. But I think, if we had, again, a room full of kids, and you could spend some time to look at them, talk to them, you could identify my 4 kids. It's not that hard. Maybe a couple if you had some people kind of look at it. Anyway, my point is there's something of me in them, right? You could just say genetic material, whatever. But not just that, there's a personality. Even the voice. All these things, because there's something of life that got passed to my children. There's a very, very, very important principle in the Bible. It comes in the very first chapter of Genesis. Everything is after its own kind. So you got, 2 kangaroos. What are they going to beget? what are their children going to be?
Kangaroos.
Kangaroos, right? Okay, I'll have a harder one. You got 2 zebrafish. What are their children going to be? If they're not zebrafish, something really weird is going on. Just like planting that grain of wheat and getting something else. Everything's after its own kind. God is a God of purity. Purity means oneness, singleness. There are prohibitions in the Bible, in the Old Testament. A human being, if they try to, marry an animal, of course they don't have a marriage ceremony, but if you were to sleep with an animal, have sex with an animal, you know what happens? They don't say, "Oh, that's interesting. You're doing your own thing, and that's cool." No, the animal's put to death, and you are put to death. It's an abomination. Not everything is an abomination to God. That is an abomination to God. God desires a counterpart. That's how he knows it's not good for man to be alone. A grain of wheat produces wheat. Eve is Adam. The church is Christ. God desires a counterpart. Who in this universe matches him? Adam had all the animals, right? I don't know what he would have said. I really like that koala bear. Maybe that could be my wife. I think God would have said, no, not Adam. You're messed up. We'll make you someone just like you, matches you. So what is the church is Christ? What is God's counterpart? According to the principle in the Bible, everything after its own kind. According to the principle in the Bible, you only marry your own kind. If God is going to get married, who can he marry? He went through the whole Bible, all of human history, to get this bride. If we are children of God, what does that make us? It's not just figurative, children of God. When I say, you are born of your parents, you're born of your parents, that means you have their life. Jesus is God. He became a man. We are born flesh and blood. We're born, human, male, female, man. But we can receive the life of God. So Jesus is God become man. We are man who can receive the life of God to be the same as he is. And corporately, as a church, this becomes the bride of Christ. It has to be this way. If the bride of Christ doesn't match Christ, this violates all of God's principles. If the bride of Christ is not after the same kind as Christ, this violates God's principles. This might be a really new, kind of hard to wrap your mind around this kind of thought. I can assure you this thought in Christian understanding is 2,000 years old. And actually it's been developed for 2,000 years. Usually we don't think about things like this. Usually it's just like, how can I be saved? Is this a sin? What good works can I do? Not bad things, right? But God's desire is the same thing that he knew man wanted. It's not good for Adam to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make someone that matches him. And I'm going to do it in a very peculiar, very particular way. I'm not going to just create someone. You're going to die. I'm going to take something out of you and produce your counterpart. God wants this match. He becomes a man. The divine becomes human. Goes through death. In death, his life is released so that we can receive it. It's not released randomly. But as a spirit, we can receive God. So when you believe and you receive the Lord, you're born again. And when it says born again, it says born again. Paul said, "Behold, what manner of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God." And then emphatically he says, "And we are." It's like, let me make this clear. If I'm a child of God, I must have God's life. Now, of course, we don't take it, we don't become God in the Godhead. That never happens. We don't become an object of worship. But God's longing, God's desire is to have someone in his image, someone that matches him. Man fell, chapter 3. We'll get to that. So God couldn't fulfill his purpose right then. So then he had to become a man himself, take on the flesh to work this out. So this is the real significance of Adam and Eve. It's not just an interesting story about the first man and woman. And you got to realize this reflects God's heart. God's desire is to have this type of match, this type of counterpart. And he did everything to do this. And eventually this all develops through the whole Bible. End of the Bible, you have the wedding, which will be us with God. If you ask me what it's going to be like, I'll tell you I don't know. Not many details. But there's going to be something there. And it is missable. In other words, it can be missed. So you don't want to miss it. So I'm going to stop. I think I set a new record. So I didn't start even at 1:45. So we can have some time in our groups. And again, some of this might be you never heard it before. That's okay. Just consider and consider what the Bible says and have some fellowship together. I mean, this stuff's dynamite.